After Raymond died, the house felt too big and too quiet. I spent my days tending the garden just to hear something alive. The nights were longer than they had ever been, and the silence only deepened the ache in my chest. When Nate came to me 3 months later, eyes hopeful and voice full of dreams, asking if I could help him and Vivian with a down payment for their first home, I didn't hesitate. I didn't ask for paperwork promises or repayment. He was my son. Helping him felt like the only thing I had left that gave me purpose. I withdrew the last of what Raymond and I had saved for retirement. It wasn't much we had planned modestly, always thinking we'd have time to rebuild after the kids were grown. But that money had a name and a heartbeat now, Nate's new beginning. I handed him the check across my kitchen table hands, shaking slightly, and told him I trusted he'd make a good life with it. He kissed my cheek and told me I'd never regret it. When they moved into that little blue house just across town, I brought over a basket of fresh linens, 2 pies, and a watering can I'd painted for their porch. Vivian thanked me with a distracted smile, more focused on arranging furniture. Nate promised he'd return the favor once they got on their feet. I didn't expect anything. I wasn't keeping score. Love, I thought, didn't require a ledger. Back then I believed that if I gave enough time, money, kindness, then love would hold. That loyalty would mean something, that they'd remember. But years passed and gratitude faded into entitlement. And now I wonder, what happens when the ones you gave everything to pretend you never gave at all? The roast was still steaming on the table when Leora walked through the door. She hadn't said she was coming. The last I heard, she was neck-deep in a project in Seattle and wouldn't make it back until fall. But there she was, coat still on cheeks, flushed from the cold, and arms full of flowers and wine. She kissed my cheek and whispered, "Thought I'd surprise you." We sat down, me, Nate, Vivian, the kids, and now Leora, crammed around my old dining table with the same worn placemats I'd used for 20 years. Leora filled her plate like she always did, neat rows of vegetables and only 1 slice of bread. She made small talk about the flight, about work, about a new trail she'd hiked last weekend. Nate and Vivian smiled politely, but I noticed Nate's eyes kept flicking toward her restless calculating. Then halfway through dinner, she turned to me. Her voice was casual, like she was asking about the weather. "Mom, is the $2,000 I send you every month still covering everything? Or do you need more?" The fork in my hand froze midair. The room didn't just go quiet, it stalled. I looked at her slowly, trying to make sense of the words. "What money?" Her brow furrowed. "The money I've been sending through Nate. Every month for the last 2 years. I felt the air go out of the room. I turned to Nate. He didn't say a word. Vivian's hand clenched her napkin tight, but her smile didn't move. The children looked up from their plates, confused by the stillness in the room. I looked back at Leora, who was already reaching into her bag, pulling out her phone. Nate spoke then finally, voice thin. "We've been managing it, handling some things on her behalf. For 2 years, Leora's voice was sharp now. I told you to make sure she never had to worry." I couldn't speak. My throat was dry. My hands were cold. All I could feel was this dull, sick weight, pressing against my ribs. I stared at the son I had once emptied my savings for, and wondered how long this betrayal had been unfolding right under my nose. Why would my own son hide this from me? What did they do with the money? After Raymond died, there was no time to fall apart. Bills didn't wait for grief. The kids were teenagers, Leora 17, Nate just turning 20. I picked up a second job at the diner on Main, pouring coffee for truckers in the morning and folding laundry at the motel by night. Sleep came in scraps. I missed birthdays, choir concerts, the fall play. I told myself it was temporary, just until we were steady again. The hardest part wasn't the work. It was hiding the exhaustion, pretending I wasn't unraveling at the edges, so my kids could believe everything was still safe. I cut coupons until my fingers cramped. Sold my engagement ring the week the furnace gave out. I kept the wedding band. I couldn't bring myself to let go of everything. Leora learned to cook dinner and stretch a budget before most girls her age knew how to balance a checkbook. She was quiet, careful, and never asked for anything she didn't need. She got herself into college with no help from me, took on scholarships, part-time jobs, and never once complained. Though Nate had a talent for needing more than we had, a fender bender, a missed credit card payment, a friend who borrowed and disappeared, each time I found a way to cover it. Told myself he was just going through a rough patch. He called me. His rock said he didn't know what he'd do without me. I held on to those words longer than I should have. Even when he and Vivian moved in together, I was the one who helped with the deposit, the furniture, the bills that first year. Leora offered to send help once she got her promotion out west, but Nate insisted he'd take care of it. "I'll handle the bills, Mom. It'll be easier if it goes through me. You've done enough." I believed him. I wanted to. I told myself it was a sign he was growing into responsibility, that he was finally learning to stand on his own and take care of his mother like he always promised he would. And when Leora called that first month to make sure everything had gone through, I told her yes, everything was fine. I didn't want her to worry. I didn't want to admit I hadn't seen a dime. Nate said he was using it to cover insurance and property taxes, things he didn't want me to stress over. I let it be. I didn't ask for receipts. I didn't ask for proof, because deep down, I wanted to believe he was telling the truth. Had I ignored the warning signs just because I wanted to believe he loved me? After the guests left and the dishes were stacked in silence, Leora stayed behind. I knew she would. Her eyes had barely left Nate since dinner, watching him like she was waiting for something to snap. I sat at the kitchen table wrapping leftovers, trying to keep my hands from shaking. She placed her phone between us, screen lit with bank statements. There, she said, every 15th of the month. $2,000. For you, sent directly to Nate's account like he asked. I stared at the numbers, so neat, so final. 25 deposits. $50,000. My stomach turned cold. He told me you were having trouble keeping up with the property taxes, she continued, that you were too proud to ask for help. I didn't want to embarrass you, so I went along with it. I thought he was doing the right thing. I looked at her, my steady girl, and felt something inside me fold. Leora, I whispered. I never saw a cent. I didn't even know you were sending anything. She didn't speak for a moment. Her face hardened, not with sadness, but with something sharper. They've been lying to both of us. My breath caught. I had held on to the belief that Nate's failings were careless, not cruel, that he made mistakes, not choices. But now, staring at the truth laid bare in numbers and silence, I felt the ache of something deeper, something intentional. Leora leaned forward, voice low and even. I want to know exactly where that money went. I nodded slowly, but my thoughts were already somewhere else, sifting through conversations, remembering quiet deflections, excuses that never quite made sense. Was this a mistake or a plan? The next morning I left the house before the sun crept above the trees. I told no one, not even Leora. I needed space to think without the sound of her anger or my own shame. I drove across town to the law office of Geraldine Marsh, a woman I'd known since before Raymond passed. She'd handled the estate after his death, guided me through paperwork when my head was too clouded with grief to read fine print. She greeted me kindly as always, then sat me down in her office filled with dusty books and framed certificates. I told her what had happened, not every detail but enough for her to nod with slow understanding. "You want to know what you still own?" she said, her tone soft but clear. She pulled up the documents and walked me through them. "The title to your house is clean," she said, "and the property Nate and Vivian live in, still in your name." I stared at her, not quite trusting my ears. "They live there. I thought I gave it to them." "You allowed them to move in," she corrected gently, "but you never signed it over. You may not remember saying no, but you did." We drafted the transfer paperwork years ago, but you never signed it. You asked for time to think. The memory returned like a whisper. Nate sitting at the kitchen table, pleading. Vivian chiming in sweetly about stability and responsibility. And me saying I needed to pray on it. I never did sign. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Thank God, I murmured. Thank God I didn't. Geraldine gave me a quiet smile. It's still yours, Celeste. All of it. I left her office with a copy of the title and something else I hadn't felt in a long time: leverage. Not for revenge. Not for spectacle. But because I needed to remember I still had power. I still had a say. For too long I'd swallowed my dignity to keep the peace, to keep believing in the son I raised. But now I knew the truth. Could I reclaim not just what was mine, but my dignity too? That Sunday after service, I lingered longer than usual outside the church. The sermon had been on humility, but the words barely landed. My thoughts had drifted back to Nate and Vivian, to Leora's face, when she showed me the transfer receipts, to the weight of the truth we'd uncovered. I stood near the steps, sipping weak coffee from a paper cup, watching people drift toward their cars. That's when Reverend Jonah walked up beside me. "Lovely morning," he said, adjusting his collar. "I hear Leora's in town. Fine woman, your daughter, always so grounded." I smiled, though my chest tightened. "Yes, she's been helping me with a few things." "Wonderful," he said warmly. "Ran into Nate and Vivian last week, you know, at that big car place on Hamilton. They were looking at one of those new electric SUVs, sharp-looking too. Told me business had been good, and they were proud to be supporting you. Said it was the least they could do." I didn't respond. I nodded politely and held my smile just long enough for him to walk away. Inside, my breath had turned to stone. Later that afternoon, I called Leora out to the porch. I sat with her in the shade while the wind curled through the trees. I told her what Reverend Jonah had said, how they were parading as caretakers, how they used her money, not just to pad their life, but to polish their image. Her eyes narrowed. "They're not just stealing, they're advertising it as charity." I nodded. "They used your name to build their reputation." She pulled out her phone again, tapping through her saved emails and PDFs. "I have every transfer, every note. I'll make sure the right people see it." But I wasn't thinking about public proof yet. I was thinking about every time someone from church had told me how lucky I was to have such devoted children. Every time I'd smiled and nodded, too ashamed to say otherwise. They hadn't just lied to me. They'd lied about me, built an entire fiction where they were the heroes and I was the dependent. It wasn't just about the money, it was about control, about standing in a crowded room and being praised for something they hadn't done while I stood next to them and clapped along none the wiser. Now I saw it clearly. The dinners, the drop-ins, the choreographed gestures of affection. It wasn't love. It was performance. An audience of neighbors, a stage of good intentions, a script written in stolen generosity, and I had been their best prop, quiet, grateful, unaware. Not anymore. How long had they been performing kindness? While profiting from my silence, I planned the cookout like I always had: burgers, potato salad, sweet tea, and glass pitchers, enough folding chairs to fit the extended family. No one questioned it. I'd hosted these gatherings for years. People assumed it was just another Sunday of corn on the grill and children running barefoot through the yard. But this time, there was something else, simmering under the surface. Leora helped with the setup, her movements quiet and intentional. She said little, but her eyes rarely left Nate and Vivian as they arrived. Vivian, in a sundress far too polished for a backyard cookout. Nate already laughing too loudly. They worked the crowd like a performance. Vivian kissing cheeks, Nate tossing a football to one of the nephews, both of them glowing with the confidence of people who believe the truth won't catch them. We let it breathe for a while. Plates filled, conversations flowing, the soft lull of familiarity easing over the gathering. Then, as the shadows stretched long across the grass and people settled into chairs with second helpings, Leora stood up from the deck. "Mom," she said, clear and calm. I think it's time we tell everyone what's really been going on. A hush fell. Someone laughed nervously. Leora looked directly at me and I gave a small nod. For over 2 years, I've been sending money to help Mom. $2,000 every month. I didn't want it to go through the mail, so I sent it through Nate. He said he'd take care of it. Several heads turned toward Nate. He froze mid-sip of his drink. I thought Mom was getting it, Leora continued. Every month. Until last week when I found out she hadn't seen a dime. Vivian stood up first. Leora. That's a serious accusation, Nate jumped in. There must have been a mix-up something in the account routing. We've been managing a lot. Bills, taxes, upkeep. Maybe some of it got delayed. Leora held up her hand. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. These are the transfer records, all of them. Every deposit to the account Nate provided, and this she unfolded another page as a notarized agreement. He told me Mom was too overwhelmed to handle the money herself, that it was easier if he managed it. People leaned forward. Aunt Vera took off her sunglasses. Uncle Don muttered something under his breath. No one laughed now. I stepped forward. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. For the record, I wasn't overwhelmed. I didn't ask for help. And I certainly didn't see a penny of what Leora sent. Vivian's face had gone flat. Nate looked like a child caught cheating on a test too shocked to lie well. There's more, I said. The house you're living in. It's not yours. I checked the deed. It's still under my name. More murmurs. Someone dropped a fork. You have 30 days to move out. I'll need the keys by the end of the month. No shouting. No drama. Just truth dropped into the center of the yard like a stone into water. Leora sat down. I walked back to the grill. Conversations didn't resume right away. People whispered, some glanced at Nate and Vivian, some looked away. I flipped the last burger and closed the lid. The smoke curled into the sky, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had something to explain. When your mask slips, can you ever put it back on? They didn't take it gracefully. Within days of the cookout, Nate and Vivian began planting seeds. At the pharmacy, the post office, the town square, whispers about me losing my memory, about confusion, about family betrayal, spun by a bitter old woman. Vivian even cried at the women's group meeting, saying they were being punished for trying to help. But truth has a way of rooting itself deeper than gossip. Leora posted the transfer records online along with a measured statement about what had really happened. She didn't name-call or accuse, she simply stated facts. Community leaders, including Reverend Jonah and Mrs. Kim from the library board, quietly liked and shared it. They'd known me too long to believe the new version being passed around. Within a week, Vivian was asked to step down from the fundraiser committee she chaired. We're looking to rebuild public trust, they said. Nate's poker group stopped calling. The man who used to be welcomed everywhere began hearing closed doors instead of invitations. I didn't respond. I didn't correct or defend. I simply went on with my day's grocery shopping on Tuesdays, tending to my tomatoes, waving at neighbors I'd known since before my children were born. When people asked how I was doing, I smiled and said, "Better, thank you." There were moments I caught Nate watching me from his car parked across the street, as if trying to measure how badly I'd wounded him, but I felt nothing sharp in return. No hatred. No desire to hurt him back, just the soft relief of distance. Sometimes the most lasting justice is not in retaliation, but in simply stepping out from under the weight they assumed you'd carry forever. Is justice sweeter when served without bitterness? I moved into the cottage in early spring, just as the dogwoods began to bloom. It sat at the edge of a slow-moving river with one creaky step out front and a wide porch that caught the morning sun, the kind of place that didn't ask much of you except to sit still and listen. Leora came on weekends. She planted lavender and rosemary by the windows, built a raised bed for tomatoes and greens, and lined the path with small stones she painted in soft earth tones. She worked quietly humming. sometimes pausing only to ask if I needed water or if I wanted this corner for sunflowers. We didn't talk about Nate. Not anymore. That chapter had folded in on itself, sealed shut with silence that didn't ache the way it used to. There was nothing more to say. He had made his choices. I had made mine. Each morning I woke to the sound of birds, the rush of water, and the soft creak of the porch rocking chair beside mine. On the days Leora stayed over, we'd sit out there wrapped in shawls, mugs warm in our hands, saying nothing at all until the sky turned pink and gold. One morning, as the sun broke across the trees and spilled over the garden beds, I turned to her and whispered, "It feels like my soul is breathing again." She didn't say anything, just smiled and reached for my hand. It wasn't the life I thought I'd end up with, but it was honest, quiet, mine. Can healing begin when you finally stop hoping they'll change? Love given without respect becomes a debt unpaid. For years, I mistook endurance for love, silence for peace, and sacrifice for proof that I mattered. But love isn't real if it only flows one way. I've stopped trying to collect from those who never intended to give, who only saw what I could offer, not who I was. I've learned that dignity isn't taken, it's surrendered, and I've taken mine back thread by thread, not with anger, not with revenge, but with clarity. Have you ever loved someone who treated your sacrifice like silence? When did you finally say enough?